there, how's it going? Good. I thought today we would do another video on another type of fishing float. This one is called a slip float, aka the slip bobber. And we got a couple examples here. Here's a couple here. Here's another one. Here's another one. Now what feature do they have that gives them the name slip float? Well, they're all hollow inside. As you can see on this one, there is like a tube or a straw that runs through it. And this allows the fishing line to be thread through the float. And that way you can set the depth of your terminal tackle at the bottom here to sit in whatever depth you want in the water column. It's a very convenient way of float fishing, because you don't have to keep on tying things and cutting and resetting. You just simply pull on a bead or a stop knot depending on how much line you want to feed through this float. And I'm going to show you in this video how to set it up, both using a stop bead or the ever popular stop knot to get the setup for one of these floats. Okay, so all right, so I just mentioned stop bead and stop knot. A stop bead looks something like this, and they come on these little wires that have these little loops, which will become very apparent when I show you how to set it up. The stop knot is something that looks like this. These are little cotton, lengths of cotton, which are threaded onto like these coffee stir stick straws, which obviously they're a lot cheaper than these. You can buy oodles of these compared to just one sprig of these things, but I will leave it up to you as to which one you wish to use. This one is a little bit more finicky to set up than this. Is very easy to set up, and these also don't last as long as these. This is why I prefer to use the bead, because the cotton does deteriorate. It also comes undone eventually, and it drops off your fishing line, where these ones will stay on to either you snap the line above it or you just simply pull it off. So, but again, I will leave that up to you. All right, so you will need a stop bead or a stop knot in order for this float to work. So let's take our fishing line, and I'm using this nice bright pink so you can see what I'm doing. I believe it's fuchsia. Anyway, you're going to put on your fishing line your stop bead or stop knot first. You have to do that. All right, don't put the float on first. Some people do that. So let's take a nice yellow one on this sprig, this one here. Okay, I say I've got a very detailed video which I'll put up at the end of this video so you can see. So this little loop here, now ladies, if I say sewing needle threader, you probably know what I'm talking about. This works on the same theory. All right, so what you're going to do is take your fishing line and you're going to thread it through that loop. Okay, just like that. Give yourself enough to work with. Bend it, double it over. All right, so you got that. Then you're going to pull this knot, this bead, onto the fishing line and keep pulling until the tag end pops out like that. And we'll put that down there. And there is the stop bead on the fishing line. See how quick that was? No time at all. This is why I prefer to use the stop bead than the stop knot. And then we're going to take our float and we're going to thread. So let me get this started here. Thread that line through the float. Okay. And then you simply take a fishing weight, and I recommend you use the butterfly back split shot. This one is a small one. I'm just using it for demonstration purposes. And you put it on the line. There we go. Underneath your float. So that's where the float will stop. All right. So that holds the float in place. Now what happens is when you cast this out, you're going to set the bead here to whatever depth you want it to go to. So if you want, say, let's say 5 or 6 feet, let's just do 3 feet here. So there's the bead there. There's your float. All right, so you cast it out, it plunks in the water, boom, That weight then drags the line down like this, and that brings the stop bead to the top of the float, and that's where the float sits, and that's about 3 feet down where your terminal tackle sits at the end of the line. Okay, so if you want to set it deeper, you're simply going to pull this bead back. If you want to set it shallower, you simply pull the bead forward, bring the line up. Okay, so when you cast again, it drops down through, bang, and there is the line underneath at the depth you have set this bead at. So that's a very simple way of setting up a slip float by using this bead. Now I'm going to show you another way, and it's using the stop knot. So I'm going to adjust the camera so that you can see what I'm doing, because it is a little bit finicky, much more finicky than doing it this way. All right, so just give me a second and we'll be right back. Okay, so in front of me we have the materials, the items that you would use to set up the stop knot, which does the same thing as the stop bead. But believe me guys, this is a very finicky way of setting it up. This is why I prefer to use the bead. Also, I've been asked this question too, that if you use the bead here, the stop bead, do you need to use this little bead as well? No, you don't. This is fine on its own. Now what this little bead does is it helps stop the knot from going through the top end of the float, through that hole in the float, and sliding down inside the float. That can't happen when these things start to deteriorate or they come undone. So that bead helps prevent that. But if you're using just the stop bead, this thing here on the line, you don't need to use that, just to clarify that. I've been asked that a few times. Do I still need to use the plastic bead like I do with the knot? No, you don't. So this little thing here, you're going to thread it onto your fishing line. Just put the line through the hole in the straw here, like that. All right, feed it on. Give yourself a good portion to work with. Now, it's very important to remember which way you pull the straw. You're going to want to pull the straw off the knot back towards the end of the line, all right? Don't pull it this way, because then you're going to have it up here and you're not going to be able to get it over this knot. So pull the knot forward. Sometimes these are a little bit tight, so you have to wiggle it. So there you go. There's the knot now on the line. We're going to pull that off, and that you just dispose of. Okay, so there's the cotton on the line, the coiled cotton on the line. So now we take the two tag ends of the cotton. You see what I mean, how it's finicky it is. And then we're going to just pull and tighten it. And then I would, just for safety's sake, do a couple of overhand knots just to give it a little extra security on your line. Okay, and then we're going to take these tag ends you see here, these, make sure your fishing line is out the way, and we're just going to take them and snip them. Like that. So there's your knot on the line. Now this little bead here, this tiny little bead here, this is a real pain. I'm just going to thread this on. All right, so there we go. That goes on underneath the knot like that. And then, of course, you would just take your float, okay, and then thread the float onto the fishing line. Same thing. You would then add your weight down underneath here. So the weight would pull the line down through the float after you cast it. So this cotton knot and this bead do the same thing as the neoprene bead I showed you before. You simply pull it back to adjust the length of the line coming out at the bottom of the float, or push it forward, depending if you want to lengthen or shorten it. But that does the exact same thing as that plastic bead I put on earlier. It's just that this is a little bit more finicky. It's actually a bit annoying. That's why I don't use it. Again, it's up to you what you want to do. These don't last as long as the bead does. Okay, so that's the other way of setting up your putting your knot on and setting up your slip float. So as you can see, that second way is a lot more finicky, and it does, you know, if you've got, your hands aren't too good, it can take a little while to set up. That's why I recommend you use the bead and not the stop knot, because it can be a bit of a pain in the butt. All right, so it does the exact same thing as the bead. The bead takes you literally seconds to set up, where this can take, you know, a few attempts if you've got the shakes. The other drawback of using this type of float is that if your line snaps above the weight down the tag end here, I guarantee you will lose this float. It'll just simply slip off and float away. Even if you try to reel it in, you're just going to pull the line away from the float. Have you ever seen floats in the water when you're fishing, or if you're just down by the waterfront and you see floats meandering along on the current in the river or in the lake? I guarantee you it'll be a slip float, because they're more apt to be lost than any other type of float that an angler can use. And that's the only problem, is that when you snap a line, you will end up losing them. I guarantee it's a slip float. And it's annoying when you lose equipment. I know, I hate losing equipment, especially slip floats. Anyway, so that is the slip float. You would shot it up the same way you would the waggle float. I showed you how to do that in a previous video. Just quickly, you're going to put your float with the weight on in a tall container to allow the float to sit properly. Don't use a dish. You need a short, long container so the float can bob up and down in the water. And that way you can determine how the float is sitting in the water with the weight on. So you basically, here on this float, this white band here is the equator. That's where you want, when you've got everything on, you want the water to be just around that white line, and the float to be sitting properly plumb in the water. You don't want it too high in the water, and you don't want it too low in the water. If it's too low, you won't see the float, and if it's too high, you'll get false readings. Okay, so you want it around there, and that's how you would plumb that float. You can do it in a tall container of water. And the other thing about this float too is if you have too much line out and your hook is on, your terminal tackle sitting on the riverbed or the lake bottom, your float won't sit upright. It'll kick over like that and lie on its side. Okay, so that's how you know if you've got too much line out with a slip float. It won't sit that way. It'll just sit like that. All right, so anyway, that's the basics of a slip float. So until the next time, and I got to get cracking because we're only a couple of weeks away before we can actually probably start fishing. I haven't got my license lined up yet, and I haven't even started to clean my equipment. I'm really behind this year. I can't believe it. Usually I've got it done by about February. But anyway, that's something I got to work on. So until the next time, I just want to say thanks for watching. Tight lines, and we'll see you soon.